अभी आप सब ने चाय वाय पी के जानी.
Luna, yes, I'm back. Yes, I came back. She hasn't seen me since I've been back. And so this one's gotten jealous. Leila! Oh no.
Ready? Rolling? The real question here is, how did I start my journey into monitoring air pollution in Pakistan?
What is the extent of urban pollution in Pakistan? Pakistan, South Asia's most urbanized country, is among the world's most severe, significantly damaging human health, quality of life, and the economy and environment of Pakistan. The country is undergoing rapid motorization and increasing energy use. The reported levels of particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, and lead were many times higher than the World Organization Air Quality Guidelines. Evidence shows that Pakistan's air quality is severely affecting millions of Pakistanis, and because experiences around the world indicate that well-targeted interventions can significantly improve air quality. Naveen and Sahar spoke to some of the most knowledgeable climate change leaders to learn more.
My name's Rafi Alam, and I am an environmental lawyer practicing in Lahore.
I'm Saida Hayat. I'm a lawyer and consultant, and I niche in climate change law and policy and work with the government and international organizations on climate change as well.
I'm Abid Umar. I run the Pakistan Air Quality Initiative, which is a community-driven initiative to monitor air pollution in all parts of Pakistan and to spread awareness about this dangerous problem.
Hi, I'm Fatma. Currently I'm in the 8th grade and getting ready to head to school. Now in Pakistan, Lahore being one of the most populated cities, it's also ranked the second most polluted city in the whole world.
A journalist interviewed you, and the first line of his article was, Rafi Alam does not allow his daughter to go to school on some days when the air pollution is as poor as it is.
On November 6, 2019, the consulate's air quality monitor showed that the concentration of small particles of pollution crept over 600. The next day, schools in Lahore were forced to close because of dangerous levels of smog. What is smog?
Smog is called by smoke and fog. It's the same pollution that we're doing through the year. The energy sector using coal and furnace oil, our cars using bad diesel. And twice a year for 2 weeks, in April and in October, farmers burn crops. But then there are brick kilns that are emitting God knows what type of smoke. There's all sorts of stuff that's going on. But it's when that inversion layer comes over the air shed that we get the smog. So I'll go back to the reference that the government of Punjab FAO study says that 80% of the pollution comes from the transport, energy and industrial sector, and 20% of it comes from, to the best of our knowledge, because there haven't been proper source apportionments. To the best of our knowledge, 20% of the pollution comes from, or the smog, I'd say, comes from things like burning crops, or burning waste, or the brick kilns, or the secondary aerosols.
A temperature inversion refers to an increase in temperature with height in the troposphere. The troposphere is the layer of atmosphere closest to the Earth's surface, in which most of our weather takes place. Normally, air temperature decreases with height in the troposphere. When this is inverted, it's known as a temperature inversion. Warm air is less dense than cold air. This gives warm air buoyancy when cold air lies above, leading to rising thermals. A temperature inversion acts as a cap on that buoyancy, preventing the air from rising further. Convective clouds stop growing when they encounter an inversion. Instead of rising vertically, these clouds can start to spread out horizontally underneath an inversion. A low enough inversion will prevent convective clouds from producing showers. A temperature inversion can also trap mist and fog, or atmospheric haze and pollutants.
Lahore is the epicenter, because it's a large city, it's very developed, there's a lot more people, therefore a lot more activities, a lot more transportation, cars. But you also have other epicenters, which are industrial centers like Gujranwala doesn't have better air quality. Faisalabad doesn't have better air quality. In fact, I would say all of Punjab has very similar levels of air pollution, and not even Islamabad is much better. Yes, compared to Lahore or compared to other cities in Punjab, it's a little bit better, but Islamabad, for example, is way worse than Lahore. Islamabad, for example, is way worse than Karachi in its levels of air pollution because of this meteorological misfortune of the temperature inversion.
In 2016, when the first smog event happened, and in 2017 when the smog event happened, and when 2018 the smog event happened, in all 3 years, crop burning on the Indian side of the border was blamed as the primary cause of the smog. This is not entirely correct. That's not how smog happens. It's actually, smog is a mixture of smoke and fog. You need to have a certain amount of pollution in an airshed covered with an inversion layer, which is a type of weather phenomenon. And when these two things happen, then instead of air pollution rising up through the atmosphere and dissipating, you have an inversion cloud that keeps it trapped within the airshed. So it's the same pollution that you have for the rest of the year, but now it's trapped within the airshed. And crop burning takes place 2 weeks of the year, twice a year, is not responsible for the crop burning. You have to understand that it's the very dirty diesel that we use in our transport sector, the filthy furnace oil that we use in our energy sector, and God knows what we burn in the industrial sector. That these are the primary, 80% of the pollution through the year comes from these three sectors. So it's not enough to go shut down the brick kilns or to blame the farmers for setting light to their crop. You have to go after the fuel refineries, you have to go after the coal-fired power plants and the coal-fired cement plants. But you don't see that happening. The enforcement that you're actually seeing is primarily against the basically poor people who can't defend themselves, versus the big polluters, the big money, and no one's questioning or touching them.
Can you break the airshed that you're referring to? Is there any kind of, does rain break that airshed?
Yes, rain or some sort of wind or something like that. But it's this time of year, it's the end of the Barsat weather and the onset of winter, when it's not supposed to be raining. It has rained now, but that was a freak rain that we had today. But by and large, until it rains or until the wind sort of takes the inversion cloud away, you're stuck with the smog.
Is it because there are political benefits to not shut down these kind of bigwigs?
You said that, I didn't.
Air pollution is constituted of a complex mixture of gases and particles. Particles smaller than 2.5 microns is a primary pollutant of concern due to wide-ranging health effects. Atmospheric particulate matter are the major contributor to smog.
PM 2.5 stands for particulate matter 2.5, and in Pakistan it's one of two particulate matters that are scanned for in the ambient air standards that we have. So PM 10, which is particulate matter 10 microns and smaller, and particulate matter 2.5, which is 2.5 microns and smaller. There are of course particulate matters that go smaller than even 2.5 microns. You can scan for them as well, but that's not what we do in our law. PM 2.5 is considered, it's a very small particle of dust, small enough to actually pass through our sort of respiratory system and through our lungs and into our bloodstream. So depending on where this particulate matter came from, it could be a piece of lead. So if you're breathing in a lot of PM 2.5 that comes from a lead base, you're poisoning your bloodstreams. Similarly, if the PM 2.5 came from the combustion of a diesel engine, most likely it would be carrying a SO2 particle, which is sulfur dioxide, or nitrogen dioxide, NO2, which are both the byproducts of burning fossil fuels like diesel. So you'll be ingesting that. And so depending on where the pollution came from, whether it came from diesel, whether it came from the burning of crop, whether it came from the discharge from an automobile or from a factory, if it's PM 2.5, it's a very useful means of measuring how bad the pollution is. But it certainly doesn't give you a picture of where the pollution is coming from. It's just telling you how much dust there is in the air. It's not telling you how much dust is coming from the cars, or how much dust is coming from construction, and how much dust is coming from the industrial sector or from the energy sector. It doesn't help with source apportionment, but it does give you a reference of how bad the air quality is.
When you talk about PM 2.5 and the size of it and the reason why you're measuring it, you look at a human hair, and if you imagine here in my hand I'm holding a human hair, and if you zoom in, you have to zoom in 30 times more just to be able to see this little particulate matter. This is smaller than bacteria and viruses. This is smaller than a blood cell. Particulate matter, fine particulate matter, once you inhale it, a lot of people think because of the word particles you're talking about dust, but no, you're talking about such fine material that this goes not just to your lungs, it gets absorbed into your bloodstream, it goes everywhere in your body, it goes in your brain, it goes in your heart, and once it's in your body, it will stay there for the rest of your life. It will not go away. And this particulate matter is what is causing cardiovascular issues, because when you think air pollution, you automatically think it's just respiratory issues, lung disease, but cardiovascular issues are a big problem. In the young, we're talking about lung and brain development. You're talking about cancer, you're talking about genetic ailments for future generations. So that's why there's a lot of focus on PM 2.5.
And do you have a gadget that you use?
Yes, I've got it right here. And right now it is reading 61. The PM 2.5 reading in the veranda outside here in Lahore in Upper Mall right now at 8:35 is 61. Now, according to the ambient standards in Pakistan, or in Punjab, forgive me, the average annual PM 2.5 level, average annual throughout the year, so for the whole year, shouldn't be more than 15. And in a 24-hour period, this shouldn't be more than 35. And on an average, within an hour's period, it shouldn't be more than 15. So under all three types of standards for PM 2.5 that we have in Pakistan, we are well over the limit. Just sitting outside, breathing air. There is no safe amount of air pollution. You have to understand, even what we consider ambient air standards in Pakistan and these standards for where PM 2.5 should be, they differ from country to country. The WHO actually has far more stricter standards for PM 2.5 emissions than we have here in Pakistan. We're probably 6 times over the WHO standard right now, but only 4 times stronger than the Pakistani standards. So there's no such thing as safe air quality. We have an acceptable amount of pollution that law deems to be okay, and beyond that, you're seriously impacting your health.
Climate change, and I love that with Pakistan, I don't think I need to define climate change per se, but everybody knows what climate change is. What I can do is I can differentiate between climate change and what weather is, because most people in drawing rooms keep confusing the two. So climate change are prolonged weather patterns over an area, generally calculated over a 30-year period. The weather is what you wake up in the morning and check on your iPhone app. That's the weather for, let's say, Lahore. So today it's cloudy in Lahore, it's been raining in Lahore, that's the weather. But the fact that I need to wear light clothes in the summer months, or cotton clothes or lawn clothes in the summer months, that's something that the climate has influenced. So it's prolonged. The prolonged impacts of weather coming together is the climate. Whereas the weather is just immediate atmospheric changes. With Pakistan, the best thing, the positive first, the best thing is that our discourse isn't premature. We aren't stuck somewhere still wondering what climate change is, or whether it exists, or whether it's serious enough. For us, climate change is a reality. It's knocking on our doors. It's impacting us in ways that nobody had expected. All the way from our melting glaciers to our rising sea levels, the fact that our crops now no longer grow at the rate that they were supposed to, that the monsoon patterns have shifted, that there's migration, that there's no water, that that water has become an issue in the country, to a large outburst of vector-borne diseases like dengue. climate change permeates all of these areas and makes them worse, to put it very mildly.
92% of the world's population lives in places where the pollution levels are above safe limits. And then there are places like Punjab in Pakistan and India, or much of Pakistan, where the pollution levels are very, very elevated, where you frequently reach hazardous levels of pollution.
I think world over, marginalized communities, especially financially marginalized communities, suffer the most. And even with Pakistan, the impact is being felt the worst, the brunt of it is being experienced by the farmers, those residing on coastal regions, and those in the northern areas who are now succumbing to glacial lake outburst floods and landslides on a daily basis because the glaciers are melting. But that's not to say that people living in cities aren't suffering from climate change.
Farmers in Pakistan burn fields to ease harvesting due to high temperatures. Fine dust is transported with the rising hot air and forms dust clouds and haze over many cities of southern Punjab and upper Sindh. This adversely affects air quality in both cities and both provinces.
In Pakistan, 135,000 people die every year because of outdoor air pollution. Yes, ambient air pollution. Do you know how many people have died because of the war on terror in Pakistan since 2001? Roughly 120,000 people have died in the 16 or 17 years since. So more people die from air pollution every year than have ever died because of terrorism in Pakistan. So you hear about a bomb blast over there, you hear about the shooting at that army school, you hear about what's happening on the border of Kashmir, and these are all these figures that are adding up to these terrorism figures, and it makes the headlines, it's in the news cycle for days. But when we have a pollution episode, nobody talks about it. Because you don't die directly because of air pollution, you die very slowly and gradually. Today it's because your throat is feeling a little sore. Tomorrow it's because you've developed a cough. Next week you'll have pneumonia and you'll rush to the hospital. And when you live in years upon years of this environment, you're cutting down on your life expectancy. So in Lahore and rather in much of Punjab, you're losing out on over 5 years of your life by living in this kind of environment. So when a loved one has a heart attack and perhaps dies, that is directly because of air pollution. When you're rushing your kids to the hospital because they have severe asthma attacks, that's because of the air pollution.
A 10-point increase in AQI is linked to a certain amount of reduction of life expectancy. And that's what the science is. So the higher the air pollution, the more serious a health issue is posed to everybody, the entire public. So that's what air pollution really is. It's actually a reflection of the health emergency that we're facing.
Hazardous air pollution is a kind of pollution when schools should be shut, businesses and factories should be shut, people should stay at home, especially kids, the elderly, they should stay at home. When we say hazardous, people don't really understand really what that means. This means hospital admission rates double or triple in Lahore. In Bangkok, when you reached merely unhealthy levels, they shut schools for a week. In Lahore, you're talking about pollution levels 2 or 3 times higher than that.
My understanding of what the Pakistani law is that we have air quality standards for ambient air, which is the outside air that we're breathing right now, and we have air quality standards for what are called point sources of emission. So an industrial unit somewhere, a big factory, will have an exhaust that is subject to certain environmental conditions and limits. So those are the emission standards for industry, and on the flip side of the coin we have the ambient air standards, which is the air quality outside. And emission standards and ambient air quality are directly linked, because if you want better air quality outside, you have to have stricter industrial air emission standards. So the two work in conjunction. So for ambient air, we've got about 9 different pollutants here in Pakistan that we scan the ambient air for. And these are pollutants such as carbon monoxide, the oxides of nitrogen, sulfur, ozone, and so on. Lead are all requirements or all conditions or pollutants that are monitored for outside air. And similarly for factories or for point sources of emission, there are standards for the amount of smoke that can be emitted, the amount of nitrogen dioxide, SO2, lead that can be emitted into the atmosphere. So those are the 2 standards that we have for measuring air quality.
So in fact, there were over 40 days of hazardous air pollution alone. People associate this with air pollution because that's what they can see in their day-to-day lives, spewing smoke out in the air. The main source of air pollution is transportation. So all your cars and trucks and buses and motorcycles and rickshaws with their poorly tuned and aging engines with no checks on their emissions. But I would say that it's not just the transport itself which is the main cause, it's also the lack of availability of good fuel. Pakistan uses some of the worst fuel in the world.
A minimal investment in pollution control equipment and a dependence on cheap but inefficient and highly polluting fuels, including coal, are worsening air quality around the world, particularly South Asia. However, we also have a problem with the air quality of the cars in Pakistan. Cars and commercial vehicles sold in Europe are subject to strict limits on the emission of tailpipe pollutants and from other sources of the vehicle. In 1992, Euro standards were introduced to help meet progressively tighter emission standards. All new diesel cars are now fitted with particulate filters to meet tough new Euro 6 standards. The standard ranges from Euro 1, which was introduced in 1992, to Euro 6, which was introduced in 2014.
We have some of the poorest quality petrol sold in the world is brought into Pakistan. The rest of the world, for example, in London, uses Euro 6 standards for various petroleum products. And a Euro 6 standard would have less than 10 parts per million of sulfur in its concentrations. Less than 10. The diesel that we get in Pakistan has sulfur concentrations in excess of 500 parts per million. That's over 50 times the limit of what automobiles in the rest of the world use. And that's why we have filthy air. And the same is true with petrol. We hardly have Euro 2 standards applied in Pakistan. And whatever fuel is sold as Euro 2 is probably being doctored with manganese, which gives you a fake RON number, it gives you a fake efficiency or an octave number. And no, the reality is we're being sold very dirty fuel because it's cheaper and it takes less dollars and less of a strain on our national exchequer and our foreign reserves to import.
So what is it about the oil that makes it dirty? Like, where's this oil coming from? Who do you buy it from? And why can't we buy
it from, I think we buy it from Kuwait. And this year Kuwait even told us that after 2020, it's upgrading its own standards and won't be able to sell such high sulfur fuels anymore because it won't be making it. And our petroleum industry responded by saying, can you give us 2 years? Because we don't have the money to upgrade our systems in that time frame.
And what does that mean, to upgrade?
It means you need to have something called a hydrocracker, which can take crude and furnace oil and make it into something that is high-grade petroleum. And that takes money.
Even where cars are more fuel efficient, the rising number of vehicles and the longer distances that are being driven over outweigh the benefits of improved technology, such as catalytic converters. It is a device incorporated in the exhaust system of a motor vehicle, containing a catalyst for converting pollutant gases into less harmful ones.
The one short-term thing which will have an immediate, practically an overnight impact on improving air pollution levels by as much as 20% is by improving the fuel quality. and that is a very easy thing to do. Pakistan is using outdated fuel standards, which we adapted just a few years ago. We're using Euro 2 standards, which are at least 20 years old. The world has moved on to Euro 6 standards. Today, Pakistan is talking about adapting Euro 4 standards. Sorry, Euro 4 standards are 20 years old, and Euro 2 is even older.
Euro standards are a set of standards for petroleum products, and they provide sort of limits on the type of ingredients the petroleum products can have. And one of the important sort of criteria that they measure for example, is sulfur. So Euro 1 standards allow for a large amount of sulfur, Euro 2 less so, Euro 3 less so, and so on. And the idea is to put countries or industries or refineries on a trajectory of reform that they will reach a Euro 6 standard or a Euro 4 standard in 5 or 7 years, and then have the relevant incentives and tax breaks in place to do so. It's not impossible. India is moving from Euro 4 to Euro 6.
So Pakistan, I believe in 2005, adapted the Euro 2 standard of fuel quality. These standards are about emissions primarily, that how many emissions in terms of sulfur content, manganese content, carbon content comes out of the tailpipe of your car or truck or bus or motorcycle. By the time Pakistan adapted these standards, Euro 4 standards, which are today over 20 years old, were already in place, so which were a little bit more strict than Euro 2. Today, the world has moved on towards Euro 6 standards, which were adapted in Europe.
There are some cars available in Pakistan that will tell you that they will operate to Euro 2 standards. Okay. But that's only if the petrol put inside them is clean enough.
Look, the changes are easy, right? Much of the world has solved their air pollution problems. You have the US, which started with the Clean Air Act of 1970. I mean, you know that Los Angeles was known to be a very polluted city up till even the late 90s. Mexico City was known to be a very polluted city back then also. It's no longer the case. More recently, Beijing used to be considered a polluted city, and they are no longer one of the most polluted in the world, because the measures that need to take place have been proven around the world that they exist, that it's possible, but those measures cannot just happen by themselves. For example, to set up a public transportation infrastructure take years, if not decades. But in Pakistan, we have not even started working on that. To clean up the industry also takes years and decades. But our environmental protection agencies are simply rubber stamp organizations which give out environmental impact assessments for every project without really doing anything about it.
PM 2.5 is the fifth largest factor contributing to global mortality. To address the rapidly increasing air pollution in the country, it is important to know the kind of air pollution that is present. While the government has not been able to deal with the issue timely and effectively, some concerned citizens have taken the matter in their own hands.
Well, it started with a simple curiosity. I used to live in Beijing, China. I was there for 5 years. And when I moved there was a time when nobody knew anything about air pollution or that it was a problem. When I'd speak with my friends and colleagues over there, and I'd say, like, look, today you can't see the sun, the sky is yellow, everything is shrouded in haze, they would respond, wow, what a beautiful day, like all this fog. And that reminded me of what people here in Lahore say, that, wow, it's so beautiful and so foggy here in the winter months. But with access to data, I knew that in Beijing, the pollution levels were at that time some of the worst in the world, but ordinary people didn't know about that. That was in 2012. Fast forward to now, and in Beijing, everyone wears these pollution masks. Everyone is using air purifiers. On polluted days, they shut down schools and offices and factories. So people are hyper aware about that. But in Lahore, this was not the case. Then I came across this report by the World Health Organization. It had been recently published. It was a report about the pollution levels in thousands of cities across the world. And there I was pleasantly surprised to see that lots of cities from Pakistan were on that list. So you had Karachi and Lahore and Islamabad and Peshawar, and I was like, great. That means some data does exist about air pollution levels in Pakistan, and all these cities were in the top 20 worst cities of the world. So I could have just, been happy with that knowledge that some information exists, but I was quite curious. I was like, okay, where is this data coming from? Because I couldn't find anything coming out of the government. I couldn't find any news reports about this. So I dug a little deeper into the World Health Organization's data. I accessed the database, I checked their data sources, and I found out that the data they were reporting for these cities in Pakistan was at that time, in 2016, at least 10 years old, if not older. How can you even report this data? Because this is not representative of the pollution levels in the city. Because like I was showing you, telling you now that, today is excellent in Lahore at this moment, but a few hours ago in the morning, it was hazardous.
And if I look here, I've got my air visual map up, and it's showing me readings in Lahore which range between, say, 93 and 155. So these are single figures that represent a number of pollutants that have, through a logarithm, has been encapsulated into a single number.
We use what's called an air quality index, which combines all these measurements together. And there are different indexes in use. So there's the one from the US, which is what we are using in Pakistan, and many other countries are using that. That goes from 0 to 500, but it's divided into basically 5 categories, going from good, moderate, unhealthy, very unhealthy, and hazardous air qualities. So you need to have data in real time over a longer period. You need to know what is it like in the morning. Should I go out for a run? Should I send my children to school? Should I keep my doors and windows open? Or on a bigger scale, you need to know seasonally what's the variation. How is it in the summer? How is it in the winter? And then I was like, if nobody is monitoring this, measuring this anywhere in Pakistan, why don't ordinary citizens come forward? So I reached out to friends and family in different cities, because I knew that just doing it in one city is not sufficient. And in October 2016, we launched the Pakistan Air Quality Initiative, which is a community-driven initiative where ordinary citizens like myself, my friends, family, other interested people came together and set up these monitors, like at their homes, at their workplaces, and started releasing this data to the public. Like you can access the data on a website, you can see it on your phone, you get these alerts. And at that time I wasn't even living in Pakistan. I was just doing this because I wanted to know, because I was like, my parents live here, I have friends, I have family here, I should know what the pollution level is, because I was in Beijing, everyone asking me that, it's so polluted where you live, what a terrible place. And I was like, maybe we should also find out how it is back home. Starting with all of that, in 2016, when we launched this, I started telling people that, it's not fog in Lahore, this is smog, this is very deadly pollution levels. I reached out to reporters, I wrote to every newspaper in Pakistan, I met journalists, but none of them were convinced. They're like, fine and good that you're doing all this, but it's not news unless if it's breaking news. And for it to be breaking news, you can't just have bad air pollution. You need to be the worst in the world. And unfortunately, after a year when we had a lot more data, that is what happened. In November 2017, the New York Times broke the story where at that point we had recorded 1,017 micrograms of PM2.5, which is incredibly high levels of pollution in Lahore. And after that, people started paying attention.
When we go to government, we're told that our meters are cheap, that they're unreliable, that the problem isn't there. As a matter of fact, the government of Punjab fudges its figures. It's changed the scale on which you measure AQI, so that under the US AQI, 150 reading will give you hazardous. In Pakistan, it's satisfactory. And these are tested numbers. These are tried and tested numbers. You can't just jimmy around with the scale. So when I go to the official people, I'm told it's not serious enough. When I go to the press, and I've spoken to almost every single owner or editor or publisher of every single newspaper in Pakistan. And I've asked them, look, can you put the air quality information on what we have in your newspaper, like you do the time of namaz, Isha ki namaz and Maghrib ki namaz, or the weather. Just have a little slot. Nothing. One journalist, editor, asked me, he said to me, if it's as bad as you say it is, Rafe, why aren't people falling in the streets? That's what our journalists want now. When it rains in Karachi for 2 hours, people are stuck for 8 hours, 10 hours, 3 people will get electrocuted. Here I am saying this is the worst public health disaster in North India, and journalists are asking me, then where are the bodies here? You're shouting bloody murder, but you have to explain to them that this is a slow burn. You don't just inhale it now and drop dead on the street. But yeah, by January, February, you have a look at your sort of good friends and their grandaunts, and you'll find a large disproportionate number of them have kicked it.
Where when people don't live that long, where people can't go to work because you're not well, where you lose out on your productive years, this is the cost, the economic cost of air pollution. So it's estimated that up to 5% of our GDP is lost because of these because of this cost. So if you reduce air pollution, not only do you start saving money, but you actually start growing your GDP because people are healthier, they're able to contribute towards society.
There is now ample data now available both to the public and the government, which highlights the dangers of air pollution in Pakistan. Air Visual was founded in 2015. They believe that data enables action, and that without air quality data, the hazards of air pollution will remain invisible and unbeatable. Air Visual provides the world's #1 international air pollution app, which offers anyone free access to the world's largest air quality database, spanning 10,000 plus locations globally, a list which is growing every day. For a city as big as Lahore, 10 to 15 air quality testing equipment would be required.
And it's important to note that there are 2 AQIs. One is the US EPA sanctioned AQI scale, and the other is a Chinese sanctioned AQI scale. And so what these scales do is they give you a single number for how bad the air pollution is. So that's the grading mechanism that's recognized under the US EPA system, under the Air Quality Index system. Last year, Lahore had 41 hazardous days, 53 very unhealthy days, 187 unhealthy days, 64 sensitive days, 20 moderate days, and a total of 0 good days. Zero.
I would say that we have been, on one hand, very successful that people start talking about this issue and the newspapers start reporting about this. But if I was to say how far are we successful with the amount of monitoring, I would say not very. We've only got about 30 monitors throughout the country, with about just 9 of them in Lahore. We want to have at least 1 monitor in each major urban area where 250,000 people live. When we have that 1, we want to have the second one, because 1 is not enough. And when we have that second one, our next target is we want to have 1 in every neighborhood. So we want 1 in Model Town and Gulberg and DHA phase 1 and 5, and the new phase is 9. We want 1 in every school, because the density of this data will help us know much more about what's happening in our atmosphere. How does it vary between different neighborhoods? What are the times of day that I can go where?
There are discussions taking place at the federal government now that talk about increasing the e-car assembly in Pakistan over the next 10-15 years. And I think it's a good idea. I think our stock of cars in Pakistan gets replaced every 15, 20 years as it is. And if you had a policy in place that would incentivize this, you might see an uptake in sort of hybrid and e-cars. But hybrid and e-cars, it's peripheral to the issue. The real issue is public transport. You have to have public transport that's electric or on sort of hybrid models, not just the private automobiles. That's really where the focus should be.
Right now, I think the government is promoting a shift towards electric vehicles, electric cars. Although I think that would require, like you said, are correctly identified, a shift in mindset as well. Most people want to buy fancier cars as opposed to, small compact cars. But a safer and more viable alternative for now would be, one, to shut down motorcycle leasing and car leasing in the country, because every other person, and it's a societal mindset shift where now people think owning a motorbike or owning a car is akin to being economically buffered or healthy. But the truth is that in Pakistan, vehicular emissions are one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. And even driving in cities like Lahore, all large cities where there's traffic congestion, it's tough to breathe during it because the air pollution is also directly linked to vehicular emissions.
The number of vehicles in Pakistan has jumped from approximately 2 million to 10.6 million over the last 20 years, an average annual growth rate in excess of 8.5%. From 1991 to 2012, the number of motorcycles and scooters used grew more than 450%, and motorcars close to 650%.
And I think it would be amiss of me to turn around and say, people shouldn't be driving cars and people shouldn't be, especially because our country is designed such that private transportation methods are the most feasible. But why doesn't the government get down to addressing this problem? Why doesn't it promote public transportation? Why doesn't, and not just promote it, but make it safer for women and children and the elderly? Why don't they make more stops along the elite areas so people living in more buffered communities in the city will start opting for it? Why don't they make these public transportation systems cheaper? Why don't they consider better quality fuel for our public transportation? Because no point in shifting to public transportation if the fuel quality is so bad that it's balancing the greenhouse gas emissions or it's still triggering bad air quality. But what you need is, and I really can't stress enough, for almost everything that's happening in Pakistan, what you need is an awareness drive. And that's what I realized when I first started working in climate change as well. I entered this area and I thought, okay, you know what, I'm going to work, I'm going to research, I'm going to put together policies, I'm going to float them to the ministry, and that's what you need. You need policy, policy, policy. And you need policy, and I've done that. But in order for those policies to be even remotely effective in this country, you need massive awareness campaigns.
We also need to redesign our cities so that they're not built for people with cars, so that they're built so that people can move rather than automobiles. You build cities that aren't so spread out, that don't require cars. You can have cities that are more friendly to public transport and to things like pedestrians and so on. But that's a question of vision. That's a question of where we want to be and who we want to be. If the first thing a Pakistani who makes a bit of money does is buy a car, then our aspirations are wrong.
If you want people to start using public transportation system, if you want people to park their motorbikes and start opting for public transportation systems, you've got to get to the problem at a grassroots level. You've got to get into their minds. You've got to start convincing them that it's better for you to use public transportation system, that nobody will think you are not financially healthy if you opt for a bus, that nobody thinks it's... World over, people use buses and metros and but Pakistan, it's a problem. Like, everybody wants to have or own a private car. And you've got, or a private motorbike. You've got to really address that issue. You've got to make public transportation systems cool. You've got to make them fashionable. You've got to make them eco-friendly. And I think,
the London Tube.
Yeah, the London Tube. Yeah.
We have to park nearby and walk because of the immense amount of cars that pass by. The statistics, there is an estimate of 8,000 cars that pass by our school every day. I'm not exaggerating, 8,000. Now, if you observe the cars going by, there's an either minimum of 2 or maximum of 5 people in the car. Parents and drivers dropping off their children off at the gate for school. Now, these numbers of cars can be reduced by carrying out the carpooling system. In that, instead of every child going in a separate car, we can have neighbors' children carpool together and go together in one car. Or we can install a bus system. Now, every adult in Pakistan has traveled through a bus to their institute, but that system has now kind of come to a halt. The reason why the bus system hasn't kicked off is because of 2 reasons. One, because of the parents being overprotective. Now, I get why they're being overprotective because of the security issues here, but maybe we can have a register in every bus so that a track record can be kept of the students that go in and out, and by ensuring a security guard to make sure that their parents' children are in a safe hands. Every bus can be assigned for the different routes that children have to take. For example, children in Shadman can have a separate bus, children in Gulberg, and so on. Now, the second might be because of the social stigma that there is surrounding the bus system now.
My grandmother went to college in Lahore in the 1940s, and she and her friends used to cycle to Connect College. She is just as Muslim then as she is now. And what's happened is that social attitudes have changed in the 60 and 70 years, mostly because of the type of attitudes engendered by people who own cars. It creates a social stratification which is false and alien, and it segregates people, and it's horrible. You can't just put a sidewalk up and expect it to be safe for people. Look, when I see an overpass or when I see a well-lit road, it seems to me that someone came into a bit of money and threw it together just for the benefit of people who could buy cars and drive them. And when I see a dark sidewalk, it means someone with a bit of money decided that the vast majority of Lahoris who can't afford an automobile don't deserve to walk out in any sort of illumination at night. It's a failure of governance. It's also a failure of people's fundamental right to mobility. I believe mobility is every human's right, and it's evidenced by the fact that God Almighty gave us legs, right? And mobility is not just the ability to get from A to B, it's the ability to choose how you get from A to B. So I should be able to walk, I should be able to cycle, I should be able to use a motorbike or a car or an escalator or an elevator or a bus or a train. I should have a multiplicity of options in front of me. And a city that takes those options away from me, or that deprives me of those options, or invests in only one option over others, is violating my fundamental right to mobility. There was a study done by JICA, 2012, it was a transport study in Lahore. And they found, with the sample size that they'd taken, that the average number of trips taken in Lahore, a trip is an arbitrary distance covered by a person during a day. And you and I have probably had 4 or 5 trips today. But that on average, for a city of 10 million people, there were 10 million trips. So on average, there was 1 trip per person. And what the ADB team found was that this was less than 50% of what is expected in other reasonably similar sized cities. In other words, people aren't getting out. We have cities where people don't get out. Why is that? And who is that? It's very clearly women don't get out, senior citizens don't get out, and children don't get out. And you're expecting a society and economy to bat in the global sort of affair of things when women and children can't go out safely or respectively? It's a violation of the fundamental right to mobility.
So would you say that an awareness campaign is the best way to approach a change in mindset towards public transport? That's how I feel.
You know, I've worked on this so long that I'll start now and I'll start day after when it comes to public transport and the right to mobility and how we've misdesigned our cities and completely, you know, a lot of the air quality issues that we have now are because for the last 15 years, the various chief ministers of Punjab have spent year after year only in the city of Lahore expanding road infrastructure that would allow for more automobiles. For the same amount of billions of rupees that were invested in these overpasses and underpasses that catered only to a single-digit percentage of the population that can actually afford cars, had the same amount of money been put into public transport, we would not be breathing this pollution right now.
Mid-term and longer term, the changes have to be more structural. for example, have public transportation, it hardly exists anywhere in Pakistan. Like 1 or 2 BRT lines is not what public transportation is made of. Public transportation is there when ordinary citizens say that, I can just walk out of my house and take a bus or a subway and get to my destination. That is not the case here. I have noticed since the last few years that every year the government makes the same statements. They're like, look, we checked the emissions on so many vehicles. We banned brick kilns, which is not the right solution. We banned crop residue burning, which is also not the right solution. And they've been just repeating that this is what we've done. These are not solutions. These are just ineffective, knee-jerk reactions which help paint the government in a good light to say that, look, we are doing so much. But we need change on a much bigger scale.
I'd go for the big things. I'd go for the petroleum sector. I'd go for the fuel sector, the fuel that we get in. I'd go for the energy sector. Now, the changing or improving the quality of furnace oil that's burnt in the energy sector will mean that more expensive fuel is imported into Pakistan to burn in the energy sector. Who do you think is going to pay for that? It's not the independent power producer. That's a pass-on cost that is going to come on to the consumer. Again, that comes with a political price. So when I'm asking people to improve air quality by improving furnace oil and the type of petroleum products that are coming into Pakistan, I'm increasing the cost of things. You increase the cost of petroleum products, the cost of everything goes up. This is not cheap. These are very difficult questions to ask. And if you're not asking these questions, you're not doing anything about air quality. You're just selling stories to the people of Pakistan कि हम ये कर देंगे, हम वो कर देंगे.
Is there a conflict between Pakistan's government's economic interests versus climate change interests?
Yeah, I think there's a conflict every government in the economic. And why do you think Trump wants to pull out of the Paris Agreement? Because if you actually get down to curbing greenhouse gas emissions, that has, and there's no subtler way of putting it, that really dampens your economic growth, because it affects your industry, how your industry functions, and not just, so like for during smog season, we try to control, especially around Lahore, we try to control industrial emissions, so we have to shut down some factories for a couple of days in the month or a couple of days during the smog period. So think about it, there's an inversely proportionate sort of relationship between greenhouse gas emissions and economic growth. And that's what most people will tell you, right? So if you start thinking about climate change, start prioritizing climate change and start reducing or start enacting measures that prevent greenhouse gas emissions, the average understanding is that the higher the priority, the lower the productivity of the nation, and so your economic health really suffers. But for a country like Pakistan, the truth is that climate change is on the same pedestal as your economic health, because there is a direct relationship between the two. When I give talks to students especially, and this is a question that always materializes, somebody in the audience will always turn around and say, why are you talking about climate change like it's a death sentence when the truth is that people have nothing to eat. And I'm by no means dismissing other serious problems that the country has, but the best way to look at it is to imagine a table and you've got child mortality rates and you've got and poor health services on it, and you've got bad imports on it, but you've got to put climate change right in the center of it. Like I mentioned, the Gwadar port, you can't import anything if the Gwadar port is going to be succumbed by the sea. If you're importing your mangoes but mango productivity has gone down, then that's a direct impact on your economy. If your crop yield is suffering because of climate change, that has a direct bearing on your economy. So you can't distinctly now segregate economic growth from climate change. Both of them are overlapping, and both of them are directly linked. You can't turn around and say that preserving the economic health of Pakistan is a bigger concern than fighting or combating climate changes, because you can't increase or boost our economic health without actually catering to our climate crisis.
The North Indian plain itself, from the Potahar Plateau and even Peshawar Valley, all the way to Dhaka in the Bay of Bengal, the whole of it is polluted during the smog season. The whole of it is polluted through the whole of the year. Lahore and Delhi play a game throughout the year to see who's the most polluted city in the world. In the world. It's not a single city problem, it's a regional problem.
Okay.
And the thing about air quality, because we've been doing this, it's the one issue amongst all others that I've dealt with that I've gotten the most amount of public sort of response and support from. Because unlike water or trees or something which can be argued to be elite issues or things that the rich can buy themselves out of, you can't buy yourself out of this. You can't buy yourself out of the air that you breathe.
There are two main misconceptions. The first is that this air pollution comes from India, and because there's a lot more news happening that, there's so much air pollution around New Delhi and around Punjab, so you just imagine that it's coming from there to here. But what people don't know is that in the winter months, the wind direction is actually from Lahore towards New Delhi. So if anything, we're sending pollution their way. Pollution is a transboundary issue. It does move both ways, but it's not that pollution from India is coming to Pakistan. We're generating our own pollution locally in Lahore and in the other cities. The other misconception is that people think it's because of crop residue burning. So we know that there's more crop residue burning happening in the summer months than is happening in the winter months. But because of this temperature inversion phenomena, all of this stays in. And while we don't have very good studies existing yet, it's hard to come up with a definite number. But I would say at most crop residue burning contributes, say, 10% of the problem, whereas transportation contributes closer to 40% of the problem.
I know that in Delhi, a lot of civil society activism is taking things like gloves, mufflers, and electric heaters to security guards, because that's a city of about 20 million people with security, and they burn God knows what at night because they need to keep warm. So yes, that's very much a factor. I also know that in Delhi, certain types of coal has now been banned from the khokewalas, the tikkas that are made. So imagine that. Imagine having to deal with air quality by banning tikkas in Lahore. Be a revolution. There would be.
Sure. So.
Handi nahi ho sakti. Log pagal ho jayenge. But I mean, that's the type of ask we're asking of the petroleum sector. You have to upgrade your industry. That's kind of like asking Lahore not to have tikkas.
Climate change. Some actions are taken by the federal government, some by the provincial government. Why is this?
Because we have a system of government that was devised by the British in 1919, which distinguishes the responsibilities of a central government from the state governments from the local governments. So you have a list. You have the federal list, the provincial list, and the local list. And this was designed by the Angrez, so it must be good, right? Anyway, we've tinkered with that system. We tinkered with that system in 1973, and we changed it slightly. We said the federal government would have responsibility over things called the federal list, and that both the federal government and the provinces would have responsibility over something called a concurrent list. And this was a cunning way to give the federal government sort of tentacles into business that was truly the responsibility of the provincial government. Because we live in a federation. You're not familiar in the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is not a federation, it's a unitary state, so you're not familiar with what I'm talking about. But it's like Germany with its cantons. They're fully independent entities. And the British were in no mood to give the provinces or the states of India their own individual elected representation. That wasn't their game. They handled everything out of Delhi, which was highly centralized. So that's where this game of lists came from. But after the 73 Constitution, and most importantly after the 18th Amendment, there is now just one list. It's called the Federal List. It has about 70 subjects on it, which are the subjects that the federal government can interfere in. Everything else is provincial. Climate change is not on the federal list. That means climate policy must be done by the provinces. Things like petroleum and energy, they're on the federal list. That's the federal government's responsibility. We can't ask the province of Punjab to work on fuel refineries. We'll have to go to Islamabad to do that. But if you want to talk about climate change, or if you want to talk about industrial pollution control, Well, that's environmental regulation. That's not on the federal list. That's a provincial subject. You have to speak to the provincial government about it. So, I mean, this is my lawyer background speaking to you about this, but that's the list we refer to, and it allocates the responsibilities of the federal government to the provincial government.
Should there be some aspects of climate change that should be on either list but aren't?
Yes, and like air quality straddles. So much we've talked about air quality, like pollution, like crop burning is an agricultural issue. It's an agricultural practice that needs to be looked at by the agricultural departments of the provincial governments. But when I talk about improving fuel quality and energy is a federal subject, so we have to go to the Ministry of Energy and to the federal government to be able to seek redress about that. And so it's not confusing. It's just that there are different tiers of government that this message is going out to, or this activism is going out to. It shouldn't complicate things. In fact, that's what lawyers make money on, frankly. But it should provide us absolute clarity so that we can hit the spots directly that we need to be able to get the responses that we want. We don't want to be wasting our time speaking to people who aren't responsible for air quality. You have to speak to specifically the people who are involved.
And who are those people?
Who are the people? Well, at the provincial level, it would be the Environment Protection Department, the Industries Department, the Agriculture Department, and at the federal level, the things that come to mind would be the Ministry of Petroleum, the Ministry of Energy Resources. There is a Ministry of Climate Change in Islamabad, but they have a very limited ambit on negotiating international agreements, so they don't have a mandate directly on this. But maybe the Ministry of Industries, certainly the Foreign Office. And you say, why? Because things like CPEC and our policy towards Gulf states needs to be reviewed if we need to change the type of fuels that we're getting in.
So I imagine that because Pakistan goes so high and so low geographically, that the topography is very different in certain areas. So I imagine that the provincial legislation or the provincial kind of agreements should be based on the context of the topography, so that may vary, right?
And it does vary. Like Punjab is far more industrialized than Balochistan. Balochistan has a much drier terrain than Punjab. The KP is blessed with forests and mountains, unlike, say, Sindh. So the topography of these areas is vastly different, and it could change within miles as well. And that's actually just also indicates why Pakistan is so vulnerable to something like climate change, because we've got so many different ecosystems, each one of which is put under pressure by the changes of climate.
Climate change, how it affects people, depends a lot on the topography of the area and the economic health of that region. Unfortunately for Pakistan, or fortunately or unfortunately, because we have such a varied topography, the effects of climate change in each district, almost in districts of Pakistan, are different. But they definitely vary in the provinces. So, which is why, and it is actually in our benefit that climate change or environment has now, post the 18th Amendment to the Constitution, been delegated as a provincial subject. And the environment definitely has been, but climate change remains. We have a federal ministry, and we have no provincial departments for climate change, and that's one of the reasons. That's one of the areas Pakistan really needs to sort of set correct, because if you go to provincial government departments and you tell them, look, climate change is doing this, this, and this to the area, they turn around and say, look, climate change, the ministry is federal, so go address it at a federal level. But post the 18th Amendment, constitutionally, climate change should be a provincial subject. And it's important that it be delegated to a provincial subject because, like going back to the question that you asked, the impacts of climate change vary according to the region. So for Sindh and even the coastal belt of Balochistan, it's very important that the climate adaptation or mitigation measures involve looking at adaptation here, looking at rising sea levels and the effects those are having. And rising sea levels don't just encroach land, agricultural land along the coastal belt, but they will also disrupt, for Balochistan, they're going to disrupt the port of Gwadar. And Pakistan is investing, and China is investing in this port, and Gwadar is said to be our sort of jewel into an economic boost, towards an economic boost. But the truth is that the Third Pole has estimated, and the Third Pole is an organization that researches on climate change. They've estimated that by 2060, large tracts of even Karachi will be underwater, not just Gwadar. And the Pakistan Fisher Folk Forum, they say that already to date 3.5 million acres of land have been encroached by seawater in Sindh alone. Most of these are in the districts of Thatta and Badin, as opposed to Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, where we've got a problem with landslides. Climate change, melting glaciers, they cause landslides. We've got a problem with, in areas like Swat, you've got a problem with flooding. We've got, in areas in Punjab, we've got flooding and large and a very sort of intense impact on the agricultural produce. I want to mention in Karachi, we've got the heat wave. In 2015, when the heat wave hit Karachi, an estimated 1,200 people died. Can you imagine 1,200 people just dropping dead in London because it's so hot? No, you can't. And it's happened in Karachi. And the heat waves are now routine. And the government, and that's where adaptation measures become crucial, good adaptation measures. The government or Karachi's own district level government really needs to start preparing for heat waves. And that means having an early warning system, letting the people know. That means making sure that the hospitals in those days are in a state of high emergency. That means providing something as basic as ORS or salts that help prevent dehydration. That means, making sure that water is readily available for people, because a lot of people live in the streets. A lot of the Karachi has some of the largest slums in the world.
Ignorance is bliss, right? When you don't know that pollution is a problem, you will not work towards mitigating that problem.
Governments worldwide are mandated to monitor air quality not for the sake of data, but for creating and evaluating policy to meet and enforce environmental standards. Monitoring air pollution is key to reducing its prevalence and health impact. By collecting data in real time puts a magnifying glass of air pollution, helping create a cleaner environment when citizens can react to their local air pollution and also evaluate impact of emission reduction policy. Rafi Alam commented that for a city as big as Lahore, 10 to 15 air quality testing equipment would be required.
PAKI is the initiative, the name of the initiative, PAKI because that means cleanliness, but also in English it becomes the abbreviation for AQI, which is Air Quality Index, but PAKI is the Pakistan Air Quality Initiative. We want to continue engaging the community because we want to let people know that ordinary citizens can have a very powerful voice, that just by placing a monitor in your home or your workplace or your school and making that data public has an impact that can help wake up the entire nation. And so we want to continue engaging citizens like that to become champions of promoting awareness about the pollution problem in Pakistan and then towards finding solutions towards that. While I was still living in Beijing, I was visiting family here in Karachi and Lahore and a few other cities, and just out of my personal curiosity, just out of interest, I brought this simple air quality monitor with me. And I took it around with me to Karachi and to Lahore and these other cities. And I looked at it and I was like, like today, we're here sitting in the beginning of November. It's a very polluted period, but for Lahore, it's not a bad day. The pollution levels are pretty good, actually. It's only very unhealthy. It's not hazardous. So it was one of those kind of days. And, I took the monitor around and that was that. And when I went back to Beijing, I started thinking more about it. I was like, I checked the monitor for those few hours while I was there, and I had a look at the numbers, but I was like, one should be able to have access to this data all the time in real time. So I started looking around. I looked on the internet, thinking that the government is releasing this kind of information. I mean, you know, the government releases information about temperature and humidity in real time. Similarly, they're supposed to monitor air pollution levels. It's a mandate of the government because it is an issue about its citizens' health. So I found nothing being done by the government.
Initial monitors were self-funded by the Pakistan Air Quality Initiative, and the rest are funded and hosted by concerned citizens and corporations. More low-cost monitors are required to achieve coverage density, enabling empowered public to fight air pollution, enabling researchers and policymakers to further the fight on air pollution. Reference standard and multi-pollutant monitoring is required to take this to the next step.
Yeah, so you were asking about how do you find out where the pollution is coming from?
Yeah.
So you have to conduct a study called a source apportionment study. You've got to have monitors and meters throughout the airshed that you're monitoring, and after crunching the relevant numbers, they'll be able to tell you how much of the pollution comes from cars, how much comes from this, how much comes from industry, how much comes from whatever, how much are secondary aerosols in the sky, and so on. Now, we don't have in Punjab or in Pakistan for that matter enough reference standard meters to be able to carry out a reasonable source apportionment. But that said, there have been attempts in the past to understand where the pollution is coming from. So whilst these aren't perhaps 100% accurate, they give you a broad understanding of where it's coming from. And most recently, there was a Smog commission that gave us rough source apportionment in 2017, and then in late 2018, early 2019, there was a study commissioned by the government of Punjab that through the agriculture department that did a bit of a source apportionment. And what they've concluded in their report is that nearly 80% of the air pollution in Punjab over the year comes from the industrial, transport and energy sectors. And about 20% of the pollution comes from things like municipal solid waste burning or crop burning or secondary aerosols or construction dust or the dust that, you know, is raised when a car goes by on a dirty road, what have you.
So these monitors and the fact that you can see the data in real time on your phone, on the website, on the app, like all the time you have access to this data, makes you much more aware that this is an issue. People to make changes, for industries to make changes, you need the government to get involved. You need even more awareness because right now only very few concerned citizens are aware. And then you also need policies, you need regulations around industry, around transportation emissions.
Senior citizens are extremely vulnerable to air pollution. It's pollution being spread by people who are not paying for clean petrol, people who like to have energy brought into their homes with no accounting for the environment. It's our pollution that is doing this.
As communities in Pakistan across provinces grapple with multiple aspects of climate change, environmentally conscious citizens took inspiration from global protests on climate change. Pakistan took part in the global protests and demanded action from their government on Friday, 20th September 2019, a day where the global strike took places in over 120 countries. Referred to as a climate march organized by the environmental group Climate Action Pakistan, called on the Pakistani government to become part of a global collective to reduce carbon emissions.
But I'm optimistic because there have been demonstrable examples of citizen action resulting in change. In so many countries like Canada and the United Kingdom, it was mothers, concerned mothers who came together insisting on things like public transport for kids that started the first bunch of concern that led to air quality reform. I mean, we're finding it difficult to speak to mothers.
So we came together, we formed a coalition called Climate Action Pakistan, and it was open to public. We asked students to join, we asked mothers to join, we asked fathers, we asked professionals, and it just sort of came together beautifully for us. We'd have a meeting, we'd put it up on Twitter or Facebook on our pages. We'd there's a meeting at 5 o'clock and we'd at XYZ location, generally at the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan or at the Last Word, which is a bookshop, and people would show up and we'd be thrilled by it. Best part is students started showing up because we'd keep it around at a decent hour where we knew the people would be comfortable coming. And so we, from scratch, started planning a march. We used WhatsApp to our advantage. And next thing you know, we are in touch with people across Pakistan. And so in 2 weeks, or in a span of 2 weeks, and I'd say maybe even lesser, 10 days, Pakistan hosted 35 climate marches across the length and breadth of the country, including Kashmir and in Gilgit-Baltistan, because everybody is impacted by climate change and everybody realizes that they've got to pressurize the government into taking serious action. The marches in Lahore, Karachi and Islamabad were the largest, with the largest turnover, but climate marches across the country were student-led, and we mobilized these students. We personally visited schools and universities, we spoke to the students, we encouraged them to come out, we encouraged them to tell their parents about the message, we asked the faculty to get involved. The number of 6:30, 7 a.m. meetings that I went to, I still can't get rid of the dark circles, but it was worth it. By the end of it, our marches were student-led, and we were thrilled by it because these students have started to realize, world over, students have started to realize that how climate change is changing their future is not how they're changing your and my future. Like I met this one judge, and he's now in charge of the Water Commission, Justice Qureshi, and he said something that's so profound and a little, it's somewhat sad also, but he said, you know what, I've used my share of water. He's a retired judge of the High Court. He said, I've used my share of the water in this city, and now I need to work hard to save this water for the next generations. And he's the chairman for the Water Commission. A lot of us have done what we had to hurt the planet, but now these children are realizing that if they don't step up, they really don't have a future. There are no next generations. This earth can just not house generation upon generation if we continue emitting greenhouse gases at the rate that we are.
To summarize, it's transportation, industry, agriculture, and urban waste emissions. And then you have agricultural emissions, so crop residue burning is one of it, but overuse of fertilizer, which releases nitrogen gases and ammonia in the air, that's also a pollution. And finally, there's urban waste. So without a proper urban waste management system, you have people burning trash in their homes, especially on the outskirts of the city. In poorer communities, you have people burning small fires to keep warm in the winter months. So all of this is what's contributing towards air pollution.
According to you, what do you think is the single largest contributor to Pakistan's growing smog?
The poor fuel quality in Pakistan. And it's also the single easiest thing to solve.
Will the government listen? Mr. Rafi Alam commented that our current nationally determined contribution to greenhouse gas reduction is in fact a trajectory to increase emissions by 400% by 2030. Continuing like this is irresponsible when we know just how vulnerable Pakistan is to climate changes. Mr. Abid Umar believes, this time in Pakistan, it's not the same old motley crew of individuals or NGOs. Citizens are now taking the lead. Ms. Sarah Hayat wrote an article for Dawn, published on the 27th of March, with respect to the improvement in air quality during the coronavirus pandemic. She said, "It is unfortunate that it has taken a pandemic to make us realize that governments, companies, and societies can function differently, and what these lifestyle changes can mean for the planet and human health. Once the epidemic is under control, we must remember these clearer skies and embrace sustainable and eco-friendly practices."
It is unfortunate that it has taken a pandemic to make us realize that governments, companies, and societies can function differently, and what these lifestyle changes can mean for the planet and human health. Once the epidemic is under control, we must remember these clearer skies and embrace sustainable and eco-friendly practices.
But I genuinely want to start a school bus campaign. After spending hours in that car, dropping off my nieces, like that, I treat them like they're my own children, and I'm just disgusted. So like, I think it's just a mass injustice. It's like quite an inefficient system as well. Think about all those people whose time is being wasted.
You know what? Don't listen to their bullshit excuses about how
I completely agree with you.
security or my kids will be kidnapped. That's all nonsense. It's just like saying women can't do this.
Yeah.
It's a patriarchal answer.
No, I completely agree with you. I think I hear more people saying that's ridiculous, whereas actually it's not. If you just took one person, you have it with backlash. But essentially, we've broken other things, we've broken other hierarchies. And actually, I went to school on a school bus, and my parents walked to work because they didn't have to worry about driving me to school. My dad went to the hospital, my mum went to her college, and I went on school bus. I think as Pakistan, like the way it's built, we need to have school buses picking children up along certain routes, because 9,000 cars passing through that one road, LGS 55 Main.